The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the CIECA cast. This is Fred Iantorno, Executive Director of CIECA. Today is the third CIECA cast for 2014. Our presenters are Andrew Bober and Joe Bain. They will discuss with us the current status of the JSON project here at CIECA. Yes, today is going to be a little bit on the technical side, just have to warn you. However, I want to encourage the business people in the audience to stay tuned. I'm not a hardcore techie, but I have learned a lot as we practice for today's presentation, and I'm certain you will too. First, let me introduce our presenters. Andrew Bober is the Data Integration Manager at Performance Gateway. He has over 15 years of experience in information technology. His specialties include software development, project process, CMMI, SDLC, team development, mentoring, technical architecture, Java, and web services. Andrew also holds a current DoD, Department of Defense security clearance of AVP IT2. Joe Bain has been employed with Nationwide Insurance for 22 years. He performs IT work for claims, integration, and underwriting. Joe holds a degree in MIS from Ohio State, an MBA from University of Dayton, PMP, and Joe is a TOGAF 9 certified. That is the Open Group Architecture Framework. He is married with 3 girls, Sarah 13, Mary 9, Leah 8. He serves as director for the Upper Arlington Civic Association and coaches a team of second graders in girls soccer. As you may know, JSON, which is the JavaScript Orient Object Notation, is the language of mobile and cloud computing. Today's presentation will cover CIECA's JSON development project, the approaches that were pursued, and the decisions that were made. The bottom line of this project is to determine CIECA's future with JSON. But why is that important? Well, as you can see from this slide, we look at hardware deliveries worldwide, that the trend is totally away from the traditional PC in favor of tablets and mobile computers. You kind of take a look and you see down, because these things are represented in thousands. So the mobile phones in 2017, or even if you look at this year, it's, you're talking about 2 billion per year delivered, and the entire planet is less than 8 billion people. So those are significant numbers, and the same thing with PCs. Also, there's a trend in wearables, such as Google Glass. If you kind of take this particular slide came from BI Intelligence, which shows the growth of the wearables, especially Google Glass over the years. So use it, but using these mobile devices currently presents itself with an issue of bandwidth. All right, just how much the Wi-Fi is usually pretty good when it's in in areas, but the bandwidth so that these messages need to become slimmer. Right, they need to have less message transmission overhead, and JSON is a language that affords that. CIECA is committed to stay on the leading edge of this new technology and is evaluating the fit of JSON for the CIECA BMS, the code lists, and the XML technology that we have been employing. And we are going to determine CIECA's path forward with JSON. So let us begin. I want to thank you for your time spending with us, and to Andrew and Joseph for sharing their insight and expertise with all of us. I will now turn this over to our presenters. The first presenter will be Joe Bain. Joe?
Hi, this is Joe Bain. And before I get started, I want to acknowledge a third person Todd Hickerson from Progressive Insurance. Todd has been a very active participant in this group, and I wanted to make sure that he was acknowledged. Our working group is about how to use JSON as an alternative to XML for messaging. And so I'm going to spend a couple of minutes explaining the differences and similarities between those two formats. I want to introduce some terms before we get into that. Sometimes throughout this presentation you'll hear us talk about schemas and you'll hear us talk about instances. And I just want everyone to be clear on what we mean by that. The actual message that travels on the wire at runtime to accomplish some business task, like create a rental car assignment, that's an instance of a message. It could be a JSON message or an XML message. The schema is another document, a technical document that defines what that instance is allowed to be. So it will define what the message is, what its parameters are, what the data types involved are, and so forth. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear on the difference between an instance and a schema. If you go on to the next slide. This is an example of an XML message. In this case, it's assignment add response. So this is what the provider of some rental car assignment service, for example, might return, and it has data in it. Atomic data elements like error code. And you can see there's a value there, 000. The start of the error code element is marked by an opening tag with some carets and the name of the element error code. And it ends with an end tag where there's a caret followed by a slash with the name of the atomic data element. There are also aggregates in this message, groups of atomic data elements that go together. Application error is an example of that. And you can see it starts with an opening tag and closes with an end tag, just like the element. If we go to the next slide, you can see an alternative way to sending the same data. This is JSON rather than XML, and it's pretty much the same content. It's the same values, but the punctuation is different. Instead of having carets, I have quote marks around my opening tag. I have a colon that separates the opening tag from the data value, which is also in quote marks. The end of an atomic data element is marked by a comma, and the end of an aggregate is marked by a bracket. So same general idea, but different punctuation. So if we can go on to the next slide. If they're pretty much the same idea, you know, why not just use XML? And part of it goes back to the slide that Fred showed you a few minutes ago about industry trends. There's lots and lots of computing happening on small devices now, on wearables, on tablets, on phones. And the preferred language to develop those kind of applications is JavaScript. JSON is JavaScript object notation. It is a way of representing data that works very well with the JavaScript language. So if you're moving towards those kind of devices, you might want to move towards that way of representing data. When my application code, say it's Java code, works with a piece of data that it received as XML, there are steps that it has to go through to take the data values out of that XML stream and convert them into an object that that program code can work with. Those steps are known as binding. And when I'm working with JSON and JavaScript, the binding is very, very lightweight. It doesn't take many computing resources, so it's a big advantage. Also, because there are no end tags in the JSON message, the message itself could be maybe a third smaller. And that can be significant when you're talking about very large messages or interactions where many, many messages are involved. The 1/3 size is not unimportant. So those are some of the reasons why you may want to move to JSON instead of XML. One thing that we've learned as a group, as we participate in this working group, is, hey, XML is I'm sorry, can you go back? XML is far more mature than JSON. All of us in our daily jobs, work with XML schemas and XML messages a lot. And what we found is, hey, it's a lot harder to work with JSON because the tools to support JSON are not quite to the level for XML tools just yet. But you can imagine from the industry trends that that additional tool support for JSON is coming. So in addition to thinking about representing your data in JSON structures rather than XML structures, part of this discussion is also how you actually transport the message itself. Whether you're transporting the message with SOAP, as you might typically do with XML, or whether you're doing something called REST. So that the next couple of slides are about that. If you could go on. This picture is really to demonstrate what a SOAP message is. In the center, there's a white box there that I've labeled business message, and that might be the assignment add request message that I showed a few slides earlier. But it doesn't travel on the wire all by itself. If you're doing SOAP, that message is carried within something called a SOAP envelope, which is a bigger piece of XML that, in addition to carrying the business message in the body, also carries headers, other blocks of XML that are meant to carry more technical data as opposed to business data. Things like maybe a user ID and password for security purposes, or information that the infrastructure uses to route the message. The SOAP envelope is carried on some transport protocol, such as HTTP. The slide says it's HTTP, but it could be something else. It could be MQ, it could be FTP, and that protocol has its own set of headers. One of the things that the inventors of SOAP were trying to accomplish is they wanted to decouple those headers from the transport layer. So if I'm moving messages around with FTP or MQ or HTTP, it doesn't matter because my headers are always represented the same way inside the SOAP envelope. But sort of a disadvantage of this approach to messaging is the envelope is big. The headers might be big, and if I'm in a world where I can use the HTTP protocol to talk to anyone I want, maybe I don't want that extra weight that goes along with the SOAP envelope. So if you go to the next slide, this is sort of showing the REST approach as opposed to the SOAP approach, where I don't have the envelope anymore. I'm assuming that everyone I'm talking to I can reach with the HTTP protocol. I can use the HTTP headers for all of my technical data. And my business message sits directly there. It's much more lightweight, and developers really like the idea of not having to deal with that extra stuff that comes along with doing SOAP. So one thing that I want to mention, but I don't want to get too deeply into, is that the inventors of REST had different ideas about how to transport messages than the old SOAP approach. But they also had some differences in opinion about how you define the business message itself. So sometimes you may, if you're in a conversation about REST, get into a religious war about whether a particular message is real REST or not. And I don't want to get too deeply into that because it's perhaps too technical for this discussion that we're having today. But just be aware that sometimes those conversations will happen. If we can go on to the next. So I've sort of gone through the differences between REST and SOAP. I guess one point that I want to leave you with about how they are different is just the idea that SOAP is a much more formal approach. When I define a SOAP service, there's a document called WSDL, Web Services Definition Language, that will declare all of the messages that are part of my service. It will declare all the headers I can use. And it's actually a fairly involved process to define the WSDL and also the schema that defines the body of the business message. Sometimes when you're moving to REST, you're saying, I want to throw all of that formality away and have something that's more lightweight. And that might be great at design and build time when you're starting your project, but maybe 3 years down the road when you have 450 services and 90% of your development staff is turned over, all of that formality that went into defining the SOAP message might help you in managing your portfolio of services. So you want to be careful about going into this lighter weight, less formal approach that you don't create a maintenance problem for yourself. One of the things that this group felt could benefit us to making REST and JSON a little bit more formal is to have a JSON schema. And some of what Andy's going to talk about is our approach to creating that JSON schema. So I think we're ready to go on to Andy.
Okay, thank you, Joe. This is Andy Bober. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about JSON schema and its current maturity level. JSON schema is still in draft at the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is also known as IETF. The draft specification has been updated 4 times. The initial draft was submitted in 2009 and updated in 2010. Version 3 was updated that same year, and the current version was updated in January of 2013. The current state of the draft is actually expired. Version 4 expired last August, so the process is in limbo at this point while the new draft is created, which we hope is in progress. And I'd like to point out that there was actually a 19-month gap between the time version 3 expired and version 4 of the RFC was submitted. So we may be waiting a while before we see JSON schema version 5. And so this lack of tools that we have listed here at the bottom of the slide is attributed to, we believe, the relative immaturity of the specification. Next slide, please. So our JSON schema project here at CIECA, we basically came up with 3 options to explore. The group settled on the following 3 options. The first here is using an XML schema and not actually developing a JSON schema. The second one was to convert XML schema into JSON schema manually, and then the third is to convert XML schema into JSON schema directly. And I'm going to go into more detail on each of these options on the following slides. Next slide, please. So on the first option, we researched a method to leverage XML schema for JSON validation. We researched the possibility of converting JSON instances into XML instances on the fly, then validating the resulting XML against the BMS. We concluded this would involve too much overhead in processing JSON message in this way, so we continued to look into other options. Next slide, please. On option 2, we researched a method to generate a JSON schema version of the BMS by generating XML and JSON instances. In this scenario, an XML instance would be generated and then converted into a JSON instance. And finally, a JSON tool such as JSONschema.net would be leveraged to generate JSON schema from the resulting JSON instance. We determined it was not feasible to represent the current XML messages using the conversion tool, and ultimately resorted to a manual conversion of the BMS into JSON schema. And unfortunately, it became apparent pretty quickly that this would be too labor intensive, so we moved on to researching other options. Now, the last option we looked into was basically the infeasibility of the manual conversion process from XML schema to JSON schema led us to identify an automated approach. After searching, we found no tools existed to convert the XML schema into JSON schema. We actually found a few posts where someone had identified a need for this conversion tool and had returned to that same post a year later only to find the tool still didn't exist. So our group decided to create the program ourselves. So we've embarked on creating a tool to convert XML schema into JSON schema. The approach we've taken is to create an open source program where our development plus assistance from others outside our industry can aid in developing the effort. The development is currently underway on a project, and the project is known as XSD to JSON schema. Next slide, please. So the discoveries we made and the decisions reached as a group were to use the existing BMS. One of the things that we had entertained briefly was to try and create an alternate version of the BMS, but we decided to stick with what has been developed over the years, as well as the code lists and the architecture guidelines. And as I mentioned, we decided to develop a program to create JSON schema from the XML schemas. And the idea is to be able to maintain just one version of the BMS. And as changes are made to that in an ongoing manner, we'll be able to just generate the JSON version of that on the fly. Next slide, please. So to summarize, of the three options, we rejected the first two and decided to go with the custom development of a program to convert the XML schema into JSON schema. And at this point, I believe I'm going to turn it back over to Fred.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I want to thank Joseph, and Andrew for this their presentation, and I want to thank you, the audience, for attending. I want to also extend an offer to you that if you want to participate in this committee, you're welcome to do so. What you see on the screen right now is that's Charlie's email address, Charlie's telephone number. Just contact Charlie, and you can join in the efforts. One of the things I also would like to do is kind of put my 2 cents into this thing. Is that the work that these guys have done, this committee's done, has been invaluable to the future. Now we will continue. CIECA will continue its XML development, so that you don't misunderstand what will happen, or what could happen. You know, the jury is still out on JSON. It could take a huge turn forward, very much like if those of you that were in the original days of XML, there was one school of thought which was called DTDs, and schemas were just starting to come out. And again, there were no tools. If you go back to 2003, 2004, there were little to no tools, and we're in that same position right now in the JSON world. So we don't anticipate everything moving into the JSON world in the short term. We kind of, and if and when these tools mature, we'll be there for it. We can certainly manually, until this open source project tool becomes a reality, we can certainly do a manual thing. A company can invest in a manual process to create the schema, or there are things you can just, there are some things that you can create instances from messages. So those things are there. It's an evolving process, and it, you know, one answer, you know, there isn't it's not a mature thing, and I hope that both Andy and Joe were able to communicate that. So what we have here is there's this slide and this slide. I present these are some reference materials that, you know, when you can download the PDF of all these slides, and you can get that from there. I also wanted you to invite you to the next CIECA cast, which is we have this twice a year. What is in the newest release? The 2014 R1 release will be in June 24th. Also want to invite you to the again to the 2014 symposium, and it's our 20th anniversary symposium in Denver, Colorado in September. Also at the symposium we will have one business track, and it'll be truly a business track on JSON and mobile computing, and we will have two technical tracks, two presentations on the technical track also at that symposium. Okay. Again, as a reminder, within 48 hours there will be a text link on the homepage of the CIECA website, which will take you to the recording, today's recording, and to the PDFs of the slides. I want to thank you all for attending and hope you have a great day. Bye now.